David, thanks for sitting down with me. Really appreciate it. Just a brief little introduction for everybody of kind of how this came about. I'm an attorney in Texas. I'm a business lawyer, and I've been practicing law for about 10 years. And as part of launching my own practice about a year and a half ago, I put together a website and wrote some blog articles, some of which were of the more serious and dry variety, some of which were of the more entertaining variety. One of the more entertaining variety was an article about a man in Kansas who went through a divorce, and as part of that, was none too pleased with the court process and decided to make a motion to the judge requesting that the proceeding be resolved by trial by combat, which for anyone who's familiar with Game of Thrones or anything like that might sound like a crazy notion, but trial by combat actually was a pretty significant part of the legal system many hundreds of years ago, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But anyway, I got an email week or two ago from the Kansas Swordsman himself, who's David Ostrom, telling me that he enjoyed my article, to which I responded, I'd love to chat with you and do an interview. And so here we are.
Thanks for the introduction. I think it's kind of amusing. I've garnered the moniker the Kansas Swordman. I have no skills with the sword, and I am not originally from Kansas. So kind of amusing all around.
Yeah. Well, so I have my little list of questions here of things that I wanted to ask you. And I was going to ask you, and the answer is obviously no, whether you actually did any kind of sword training or, any sort of like combat sports training, or like you look like you may be like some kind of boxer or martial artist or something. No combat training, nothing?
No, I mean, I played sports in like elementary, middle school, and high school growing up, but I don't have any particular deadly weapon training or martial arts training. And I mean, honestly, I thought it was probably best if I didn't going into a filing, which centered around having a quote unquote duel.
Right. I suppose the judge was never going to say yes.
I never expected a judge to say yes based on, some of the research I had done in modern cases where folks had asked for trial by combat.
Right.
It was essentially, to garner publicity around the case. And really the whole kind of frame of mind that I was in was I had been, in this family law equity court arguing. I originally went in arguing modern psychology of, hey, it's in the best interests of children to have equal access to both parents. To which the court told me, firstly said, Mr. Ostrom, are you a licensed psychologist? And I said, no. And the judge said, well, Mr. Ostrom, we're in a court of law here, so you should stick to arguing the law. Long story short, I eventually came back and said, hey, it looks like trial by combat's the law, so why don't we have a trial by combat? And the funny thing I thought is at that point they said, oh, well, that's a crazy law. We can't follow that law. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting, because I think the child custody laws are pretty crazy, but
right.
I have to shut up and follow those laws, whether I agree with them or not.
So almost smart. I hope you don't mind me describing that as a smart aleck emotion, almost a smart aleck emotion of protesting the double standard as you saw it of, here's this one place where we, our hands are tied by the law and we can't do anything because that's what the law says. But this other place where, hey, you found a little technicality where trial by combat may technically still be legal under the law, but oh no, that's crazy, we can't do that.
I was trying to point out the logical fallacies in the legal system and the fact that, they started arguing with me, oh, that's archaic law, Mr. Ostrom. And it's like, have you looked at any family law research or psychology in the past 50 or 60 years?
Right.
Based on, family law, a lot of it was born in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there's been large amounts of psychological research in family dynamics since then. So it's essentially equivalent to the Dark Ages, in my opinion.
Right. I'm not a family attorney, but I from what I understand about psychology, and like you, I'm also not a licensed psychologist, but from what I understand, two parents is a massively beneficial thing for the kids. And, there's not really any controversy about that. As well, we had ritualized dueling not but a couple hundred years ago. Or
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Alexander
Well,
Hamilton and all that.
well, like Andrew Jackson, for example, dueled all
Right,
throughout his presidency.
right, right, right.
That was well after the Constitution was ratified.
Right, right. So perhaps not quite so archaic as we thought.
Not much older than the light bulb, really.
Right, right. So what happened in the case after you made your motion? There was, I read up a little bit on this, and it looked like there were some psyche evals tossed around by the court. How did that go?
The chain of events here is early January 2020, I filed for trial by combat. And about a week later, my ex-wife's attorney, Mr. Hudson, filed his resistance. And then I filed my response. And then it was, maybe 2 months after that, the judge set a hearing for trial by combat, essentially. And Mr. Hudson asked that I get a that I get a psych eval and I be prevented from seeing my children. So I believe it was early March of 2020, we go into the courtroom in Shelby County, Iowa. And at this point, we're like 2.5 years into this back and forth custody battle court case.
Right.
And so I've been to a number of hearings and trials at this point. At no point leading up to this trial had the courtroom ever been packed with law enforcement officers. When I showed up for the trial by combat hearing, the hallways were lined with sheriff deputies that were armed in full battle rattle. They had flak jackets on, they had shotguns, and they were not only in the hallways, they were in the courtroom itself. And anytime I got up and left the courtroom, went to the bathroom, went outside, around the property in the courthouse, the sheriff's deputies were closely following me.
They think you were gonna like go get a sword or something.
Well, it was kind of funny because, they'd like ride the elevator up and down with me. And I said, they really rolled out the red carpet for the Kansas Samurai, huh? And the sheriff's deputy looked at me and said, "Oh no, this is all very normal." I said, "Okay,
Right.
okay, I believe that one."
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, we had the initial hearing for trial by combat, and at that point, I'm kind of irritated with all the back and forth games and stuff. My ex-wife is denying me contact and telephone calls with our children. I've kind of made this statement in the news and through some interviews in the media of, hey, she's playing dirty. I just want equality in custody and outcome here. So we get into this court hearing, and Mr. Hudson gets up and he starts talking about, well, I'm very afraid you threatened to kill me. What should I expect from you, David? And I said, man, I didn't threaten to kill you at all. I offered to meet you on the field of battle and beat you at a sword fight. And then he started calling me crazy. I said, well, the fact that I filed a motion and I've kind of outlined the stipulations for our mutual combat, and I've asked the judge to sign off on it and sanction it. I mean, that in and of itself should point to my lack of insanity and my willingness to follow the rules.
Right.
And then I spent, I don't know, we must have been there like 4 or 5 hours, but I spent a very large amount of time kind of on a soapbox, telling off the judge, telling off Mr. Hudson about the absurdity of the fact that a non-custodial parent should even have to come to the court and put on a show like this and demand equal custody. And then, the very fact that you people would call me crazy for demanding equal outcome and equal access to our children just points to the absolute absurdity that the family court system has kind of devolved into. But and then I kind of had a little soapbox moment of, they called me crazy for potentially putting myself in a situation where I could die. And I pointed back to Patrick Henry's speech about, life isn't so sweet that we would choose to live in chains on our knees to, sustain that level of life or living, that there's things worth fighting and dying for in the world. But, ultimately, the judge didn't really know what the hell to make out of the whole scenario. So he said, we're going to send you for a psych eval, and you go ahead and give me that evaluation, and we'll go from there.
So what was the judge's, did he seem angry? Like, was he amused? Was he like what was the reaction if you had to kind of describe it?
I think the judge didn't know what the heck to make of the whole situation. I think he understood that there was obviously a high level of animosity between myself and my ex-wife.
Sure.
But
Certainly wouldn't be the first family court case for that to happen.
right.
Right.
But I don't think he really knew what to make of it, because I had consulted lawyers before going in and doing any of this, and kind of the conventional wisdom is, hey, be quiet, be humble, try and look like a nice guy, and slowly build up your case and prove over time that you're the better parent. At least to me, that kind of flies in the face of everything I've learned in life and growing up and, kind of dealing with bullies and stuff. You don't just shut up and back down and take it. You make a big noise and call the bullies out on their bluffs. And at least I felt like Mr. Hudson, my ex-wife, were really kind of using the court system to bully me around and make false allegations and try and garner better outcomes just through mere allegations without any kind of evidence whatsoever.
And again, far from the first person in family court who would have that kind of complaint. Something that you hear, not a family lawyer, but you hear it over and over. This is
Yeah.
I'm with you as far as you feel like you were mistreated by the family court system. You feel like they were bullying you and you're not being treated fairly, and you want to make a protest. So, but out of all of the protests that you possibly could have made, like, how did you get the idea for trial by combat? Like, did you just have like an aha moment? Have you are you a fan of medieval history? Like, are you like, where did this come from? Is sort of my question.
I mean, it probably culminated, with a number of things, but I mean, the idea kind of sparked in my head probably early 2019. So I mean, I ruminated on it for a good 9 or 10 months before I actually filed. But I mean, Game of Thrones, obviously,
right? Fantastic.
Yeah, and based on the books, Song and Ice of Fire.
Right.
But they really made the whole concept very, very prominent in pop culture. But I mean, from that, I did historical research and found out it's actually a real thing.
Right. Right.
From Germanic tribes and whatnot. And
very similar to the witch trials in a lot of ways, right? The idea being that do this thing that is stochastic and random and unpredictable, and God will determine the winner. I read about another judicial proceeding where they would take somebody and throw them into a river, and if you didn't die on the way down the river, well, then God had decreed that you were innocent.
Yeah, trial by ordeal. Correct. I guess that would fall under. But like trial by combat was typically reserved to issues of property disputes, and we had a property dispute at the time. There's this law professor, finance law professor, Peter Leeson, that did a 25-35 page write-up on the fact that trial by combat was typically made more financial sense in the long run than going through a bunch of long legal proceedings. And generally, the landowner more interested in the land and better at preserving it would be interested in really fighting for the land.
So if you were a big burly dude that could fight, then you would be better able to protect your land from bandits or wild animals or what have you, is the sort of
Uh,
argument?
well, you were more likely to file for trial by combat if you were a good custodian of the land in question.
All right, let's get a little bit of an update. And then we talked about over email. So it sounds like this has sort of for you had a happy-ish outcome, that now you get more time with your kids. And like how's everything worked out for you?
Essentially what happened is, COVID hit early 2020.
Right.
And kind of right after we had this trial by combat hearing, and the judge ordered me to take a psych eval. So that slowed down my access to a forensic psychologist to get a psych eval.
Right.
So it was May 2020. I spent an entire day doing a battery of psychological tests. And my psychological test came back. It was no issues whatsoever, no pathology. Um,
That's not,
no.
you seem like a pretty normal dude, just from our
Well, I mean, you never know, I guess. But the psychological exam came back essentially pristine. I was just angry at being treated unequally, and angry at the fact that I had to follow the rules, but others didn't necessarily have to follow the same rules. So after that psych eval came back, I submitted to the court. The judge restored my custody essentially within a couple of days. And then we went from May of 2020 till February of 2021. February of 2021, we had a new trial to revisit custody and a couple of other issues.
Okay.
But I essentially showed up pro se, and I had to, do a bench trial versus Mr. Hudson. And it was a very surreal time, because I outperformed Mr. Hudson on every topic and won more custody. I think the only thing my ex-wife got that she asked for was that I had to give her 168 hours to respond to any requests that I wanted to discuss.
Okay.
And I essentially got 50-50 custody summer times, more holiday time, and more time during the normal school year, and regular call contact with a defined schedule. It was kind of interesting. The judge thanked me for staying focused and on topic, and the judge reprimanded Mr. Hudson for not staying on topic. At one point, he cut him off and said, "Mr. Hudson, you're a lawyer with experience. You know better. You need to start doing better."
So just so I'm understanding this correctly, the guy who previously had made the trial by combat motion was thanked by the judge for being on topic.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Well,
Beautiful.
the thing that helped me the most is I did some additional training. I hired a therapist, because at first I was court ordered to take 10 therapy sessions to get makeup time, because they had suspended my parenting time for like 5 months or something to begin with. So I asked that it be reinstated and let I also get makeup time. The judge said, "Sure, it'll be reinstated, but if you want makeup time, I want you to take 10 therapy sessions." So I took those 10 therapy sessions, and then I stayed on with my therapist because she offered to help be like my sounding board for preparing for trial. So I think between a therapist preparing me for trial and actually training with some real lawyers,
Right.
I actually got to a point where I could beat Mr. Hudson. But I wanted to say, I spoke to one lawyer that highly recommended watching My Cousin Vinny as trial prep for examination and cross-examination. And I kid you not, I think watching My Cousin Vinny helped put me over the top for winning my trial.
But did you wear that suit?
No, no,
No red velvet suit.
no, not quite that bad.
No, it's a great film, and I whoever gave you that advice was very on target. I've thought about doing a video on this. So there are a lot of really bad depictions of the way that trials and motions happen. A lawyer makes an objection, and I'm like, the other person just keeps talking, which is
Yeah.
totally wrong and totally not what you're supposed to do. But it doesn't really make for good theater to like, oh, objection, and then silence. Well, I mean, okay, that's not entertaining. So My Cousin Vinny is a good one. The one with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men.
Oh yeah, A Few Good Men is
Yeah.
spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some unrealistic bits. Kind of good example of how to fluster a witness and sort of get them off their game where they say something that they're not supposed to.
Well, the thing I really took away from My Cousin Vinny is, I had no experience when all this custody stuff started, and I'd kind of run on at the mouth and try and make logical arguments to the court, and I'd end up all over the place verbally. I would spend a bunch of time talking, trying to convince people of stuff. So my tactic going into trial this time was just to ask very small, short little questions to my ex-wife and get a yes or no answer and lead her down a yes or no path.
Yep.
And then after, I've got a bunch of no's in a row, then I flip it around with, well, you said no to all of this. What about this? Oh, this is yes. So you do this, and this, but not this. Why is that?
Yeah. And the other, if you talk to a seasoned trial lawyer, it's yes or no questions and ask questions that you already know the answer to.
Yes, yes. And objection, non-responsive saved my life multiple times, because I would ask my ex-wife a question, and she'd start giving like this big sprawling narrative. And I'd just have to look at the judge and go, objection, non-responsive. And he would actually force her to say yes or no.
You probably, candidly, you've probably spent more courtroom time than a lot of attorneys at this point. You've certainly spent more courtroom time than I have. I'm a deal lawyer. I do. I show up a little bit in probate court, but I don't question witnesses and do trials and do that whole thing. So you clearly had some good prep. So do you have, and I'm not going to ask you for names at all, but do you have friends who are attorneys? Did you just like consult with people and pay them hourly to like help you on the side? Did you just like, were there pro bono offers of people who were so tickled by this trial by combat thing that they said, let's like, how did you network with these people to prepare yourself?
It's kind of a mix of stuff. I noticed I became highly radioactive in the legal community when I filed for trial by combat. It was kind of a stark
why.
It was kind of a stark dichotomy. Most people just thought I was really crazy, and they said, well, you've really done yourself in with this one. Good job, good luck. But there were a few people that said, hey, this is ridiculous. Why don't you let me help you at least figure out how not to make yourself look like a complete idiot? Right. So I probably had a few dozen hours back and forth, some paid, some pro bono, with lawyers. Other stuff is just mountains and mountains of legal research for predominantly stuff in Iowa. And also what I did is I looked up, opposing counsel. You can find him. Iowa's really good because they list everything online in their court system. So I could look up Mr. Hudson and all of his cases and, get a large digital stack of his cases. And then I just cold call people that he went up against. And I'd ask him, hey, what do you think about Matt Hudson? Was his weaknesses? And, just try and pick their brains for how to try and beat the guy I'm fighting.
Right. You did like opposition research, basically. To my non-family court, non-litigator mind, your explanation of, look, the system is unfair and was rigged against me. And when I argued fairness, they wanted to talk the law. And then when I argued the law, they wanted to talk fair. that's
Yeah.
pretty cogent and pretty reasonable. And, you know, without making a pronouncement of like, I think you're right, wrong, or otherwise, like that's a coherent argument. Like that narrative sticks together.
I kind of waffled around a lot when this first happened. I mean, it was not to belittle any of this. It was very, very emotionally upsetting. I didn't think I was going to be capable of weathering this kind of a storm. At certain points, I felt like giving up. I would break down and cry, and I didn't know if I could go on. Frankly, I finally had to ask myself, you know, if I were my children, what would I expect me as my parent to do? And at least the answer I came up with is I would not be satisfied if my father gave up. So once I had gone through that kind of argument with myself, I could at least go, okay, I don't care if I win or I lose. I'm just not giving up at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep crawling, keep fighting, keep pushing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. If there's anything that you wish I would have asked you about, you can ask yourself the question. We can pretend that I asked you.
I mean, you know, kind of in line with my last point is, at least as far as any of us know, we just have our one life to live. And I mean, I could have been the guy to be quiet, go along humbly, and try and be nice, but I figured I'm stuck in this mess anyway. I might as well do something different. It certainly hasn't changed the tide. You know, it's not like I'm some big savior that came along and said, oh, there's a big fallacy here, look at this, and suddenly it's all toppled. But I think at least I'm some sort of signpost now in the history of family law and maybe trial by combat of you know, maybe 30, 40 years, we can look back and go, can you believe how crazy family law was? There's a guy that had to go file for trial by combat. Now, people break up and we just let them have equal contact with their parents because it makes sense.
Right. That's how desperate one parent was that, you know, had to do something, you know, a little bit absurd to kind of call attention to it. No.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I hope it's some sort of inspiration, even if it's just something to laugh at for other parents out there to look and go, well, at least I don't have it as bad as this crazy guy.
Yeah. I hear you. Did you get wind that the lawyer on the other side was like trying to learn how to fight or anything like that? Or any, like if you had filed a motion for a trial by combat against me, I'd be like, dude, I need to, I trained combat sports to begin with, but I'd be like, dude, I need to double down on my training. Like show up in a parking lot and like, you know.
Well, it was kind of funny because we were at the initial hearing for trial by combat, and, you know, Matt's up there trying to make fun of me. Is like, you could have a sword and you could hurt me. I'm very scared.
Where are you going to hide a sword?
Right. I said, I see you there laughing and joking at me, Matt. You're obviously not scared, but you ought to be scared, because if the judge gives me a sword, I'll cut you right down.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I mean, like I've told other people, if nothing else, you know, from early 2018 leading up to the trial by combat hearing in 2020, I was so frustrated and angry that when we got up to the trial and I got to tell everybody off and make fun of them publicly in the news, it was like a huge weight was lifted off me. I got to make fun of these people and challenge them to a sword fight. If nothing else, it was a good laugh, and I felt very good after having the laugh.
Yeah, cathartic almost.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how many of these interviews have you done? I'm just curious. I'm sure I'm a small fish compared to some of the folks you've talked to.
Oh, I mean, I've talked to, I think the biggest one was probably like a Fox News channel, a CBS News channel. Yeah. Done a couple of radio shows, a couple of podcasts, and I don't know.
How'd those go?
If you want to see a crazy one, I forget the gentleman's name, but if you look up British radio host, Des Moines, Iowa, He's like the only British radio host in Des Moines, Iowa. I
Right.
did an interview with him and it went absolutely off the rails. So if you want to hear my worst interview, look that one up. It was cringeworthy. I remember that much.
Okay. Well, hopefully I haven't made you cringe too much. I think I'm probably pretty tame as interviewers go.
Yeah, it's been fine.
Well, again, thank you for coming on, David. Really appreciate it. I wish more people would kind of take the effort to, because there are some like really weird quirks in our legal system that
Yeah.
I'm sure when you started learning about this stuff, you went down the rabbit hole and like holy crap, this was never really abolished, and like
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy.
common law is nuts.
Let me throw in this real quick anecdote for you. So, I mean, when all this started, I didn't know what the hell to do. So, at least coming from my background, IT, I knew I could scrape a lot of data and try and make connections and try and figure out what the best path is. So, going down that vein, I started reading all the civil rules of procedure. I read them for Iowa, I read them for California, Kansas, the federal rules of procedure.
How many times did you fall asleep during that project?
I'd have to take breaks often, but I'd read them and I'd reread them and I'd reread them. So when we got to court, I'm in the court arguing trial by combat. And at a certain point, I'm, kind of agitated and I'm loud. And the judge goes, "Mr. Ostrom, you're out of control. You need to stop." And I, stop immediately and go, "Your Honor, I'm not out of control. I have a right as pro se litigant to zealously defend myself. And what you're looking at, sir, is a pro se litigant showing up in zealous of defense of self, and I will not shut up."
Hey, there you go.
Well, he immediately said, "Okay, Mr. Ostrom, continue." I said, "Okay, thank you."
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, hey, hats off to the judge for, being fair about it and letting you, continue to make your case.
I mean, all in all, I think the judge has been a pretty good guy. he's kind of ran into a very odd situation.
Yeah, media circus, odd situation, but it sounds like everything has turned out fairly okay. Thanks again. I hope everything continues to go well for you and your kids, and I'm glad to hear that they have two parents in their life again, as we know how important that is.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. And, if nothing else, I hope I've at least made it impossible for anybody to say, "Hey, David Ostrom isn't interested or doesn't care about his kids."
Excellent point. All right, David, I'm going to cut the recording off and thank you again.
Good talking to you, Ryan. Thanks a lot.